Okay, I'm going to endeavor to cover book 4 and 5 of Plato's Republic in just a few minutes here. Again, keeping in mind that our purpose is historical analysis, right? That we're trying to understand why Plato held the opinions he had about, what he saw as the ideal community. So he brought up kind of the Spartan model in the previous book, right? That everyone would have a roughly equal amount of property, and they would have most things in common. They would not have precious metal currency and such things, and this would be true even for the rulers. And at this point, Adeimantos, one of his dialogue partners, breaks in and is like, well, isn't that kind of unfair to those who are the best in the society, right? They're not going to get any joy out of all of this if they're reduced to the same condition as everybody else. And Socrates responds by saying, this isn't about the happiness of one group or of individuals. This is about the whole. The city is not for the good of just a few. It's meant to make the whole beautiful, as he says here, right? And so in order to do that, it needs to do away with some of the ills of society. It needs to do away with concepts of both wealth and poverty. Wealth because, those who have wealth, as he sees it, end up in idleness and they don't contribute to the society. Those who are in poverty are so desperate that they don't do good work either, right? He says that wealth creates luxury and idleness and faction. Poverty adds meanness and bad work to the faction. And so we want to do away with those things, right? And so therefore, there are kind of three aspects of the society that Socrates brings up here in Book 4. He says everyone should have a roughly equal share of property, right? I guess of land or of goods. That there should not be jealousy between people, right? There should be no concept of wealth. Everybody should be equal, no matter what they do. They should do what they're best suited to, and they should have an equal share. And this is only going to be possible if the rulers of the city make sure that the city never gets too large. Okay, now this is a kind of key aspect, right? He says here on the right-hand side of this page, to guard in every way that the city be neither small nor seeming to be large, but just great enough in a unity. You cannot have unity if the city gets too big. It's just too complex, right? So therefore, they've got to regulate like how many children are born, and just take very great care of the size of the population. Okay, and then the third aspect, so equality, the right size, and then the third one is meritocracy. If you see the bottom of the right-hand side of the page here, if a trifling kind of son should be born among the guardians, he was to be sent off to the others. If one showing excellence are born among the others, he should be sent to the guardians, right? So there is no respect of birth and all of that, right? They do what they are best suited to do. Okay, and then he brings up this point, and he doesn't elaborate on it. He says, and the possession of wives and marriage and begetting children, that these must also be held in common. And then they kind of leave that behind. Now keep that in mind because this is going to come up again. Now, one thing that he notes here, and we might remember in Plutarch's Life of Lycurgus, the mention of this, he says we really shouldn't have written laws, right? Because if we have written laws, we're always going to be poring over these things and worrying about them, making sure, trying to make sure they're in the best shape. This is going to lead to endless debate. He says debate in a society is an indication of sickness rather than health. And this is, I think, a direct criticism of Athens, right? Athens was constantly having meetings of the citizen assembly, the ecclesia, and they were never sort of satisfied with the condition of the society. Socrates is proposing something very similar to what we saw in the Life of Lycurgus, that is, teach people correct principles, let them live by those principles. Let's not worry about debating laws. Let's leave it in the hands of the rulers who are best suited to do this. But in order for this to happen, now this is where he kind of breaks down the society, right, into its component parts, okay? And let me just kind of deal with this very simply. He says that there are sort of three parts, or there should be three divisions in the population. And these correspond with what he sees as parts of the human soul, okay? The thinking part ought to be pushed toward wisdom. And so every human being has the ability to reason. That ability to reason can, be pushed into a productive path, or it can be led into nefarious things. He says, that reasoning part should be cultivated so that people tend toward wisdom. But of course, there are those who excel in wisdom above all others, right? These people should become the rulers. The second part of the kind of human tendency or human soul, okay, is the what he calls the spirited part, right? And this should this can be driven to counterproductive ends. People can become cruel or something like that with the high-spirited part. They can become kind of inured to human suffering and such things. He says instead that this should be pushed toward, or kind of trained toward, courage and bravery. All right, and then it would become a preserver, as he says here in the highlighted part, right? Such a power, I say, and preserver, though, through everything of right and lawful faith about what is dangerous or not, is courage. And so there will be a segment of the society who are the wisest, and they should be the rulers. They are assisted by the what he calls the assistants, but this is really the lower part of the guardians, the ones who are not chosen as the rulers, but essentially the warrior class, right? Then the third part of the human soul, okay, is what he calls the desiring part. Now, he hasn't gotten to this yet. He's going to circle back and talk about this at the individual level. But the desiring part should be crafted toward what he calls temperance. That is, it should not be given free rein to, eat and drink and have sex just kind of willy-nilly. That these powerful urges ought to be tempered to the good of society. Now, temperance is a virtue that should be and must be, he says, cultivated by every member of the society. Wisdom belongs to the rulers, courage to the warriors, but temperance is something that everyone should have. And if the entire society doesn't have temperance, then the thing's going to fall apart. Okay. Now, this leads him finally to justice, all right? This is where, this quote is where he's talking about, okay. He says, temperance does not act as these do. It is stretched right through the whole city, bringing all the strings into concord, and creating what he calls a unanimous mind, all right? Now, then he's able to say, okay, what have we learned, and can we now give a definition to justice at the collective level, right? And he settles on this, bottom of the page on the right-hand side here. Justice is that very thing, I think, or some form of which we laid down at first when we were founding the city, and that is for everyone to do that thing for which his nature was best fitted. Okay? To do one's own business and not to meddle with many businesses is justice. Now, keep in mind that in Athens, a lot of people, were involved in various activities. That merchants could also be warriors in the army. They could be craftsmen. Farmers could be involved in commerce and in war, right? And this didn't lead to a very highly functioning city, as Plato saw it. And so he's criticizing Athens directly. In the same way, he may also be criticizing Sparta here, because Sparta gave all of their emphasis to the warriors, and you really need the whole of society to work together, I think, okay, as Socrates sees it. Now, so then he says, okay, now I think we can discover what justice is in the individual, and that is that just as the city should have this hierarchy where the wise ones rule, the assistants, the warriors aid in creating safe conditions for the society, and everyone practices temperance. The same should happen at the individual level. If an individual is going to be just, their thinking part should be driven toward wisdom, their spirited part should be driven toward courage, their desiring part toward temperance, and that the wisdom should govern over the courage and the temperance. So the structure of the city is replicated or paralleled or mirrored, trying to find the right word here, in the parts of the individual soul. Okay, and that's how we get justice in an individual. Now, I've kind of glossed over a lot of the stuff here in the latter part of Book 4, okay, but I think that we've gotten to where we need to be. At the end of it, he says, okay, so let's talk about governments, the kinds of governments that exist in our world, and show where the flaws are, and then talk about which ones are the best, right? And he's ready to head into this kind of case study conversation. And then we turn to Book 5, and one of his interlocutors, it seems like there's a new guy on the scene here. His name is Polemarchos. He says, wait a second, Socrates, right? You are cheating us out of a whole chapter of the discussion, and by no means the smallest, because you don't want to discuss it. Do you imagine you will get away with the remarks you dropped in that light way? What was it about women and children clear to anyone? Did you say that friends will have all in common? So he's like, I really want to know about this, wives and children in common thing, okay? And this leads Socrates into a fairly long discussion about the role of women in the society. Okay, so he says two things about women, all right? And there's a lot here, and I could elaborate on this, but let me try to simplify it, all right? The first thing is that women have the same capabilities as men. They may have less physical strength, sort of generally speaking, but women can be musical, they can be medical, they can be martial, meaning they can be decent warriors, right? They can have physical strength and things like that. Obviously, women bear children and men don't, so there are some key differences, right? So because women have these capabilities, they also should be given the tasks to which they are best suited. If they are best suited to be a physician, they should be trained in medicine. If they are best suited to be a poet, they should be trained in that. If they are best suited to be a guardian, well, Socrates says that's fine. Women can be guardians, okay? And they should be given the very same education. As he says here on this page, we must teach them the same things as we teach the men, right? Their guardians and their wives should practice the same things. Both men and women may have the same nature fit for guarding the society. Only one is weaker and one stronger. For a woman to become fit to be a guardian, we shall not need one education to make men fit and a different one to make women fit, especially as it will be dealing with the same nature in both, right? So they have the same education, okay? So that's the first point he makes about women, right? And then because he has kind of leveled men and women, he says we really need to get away from this hierarchical relationship, which is marriage, all right? These women are to be all common to all these men. No one must have a private wife of his own, and the children must be common too, and the parent shall not know the child, nor the child its parent. Now, this is because, and you kind of have to extrapolate this, but the family is a rival institution to the state, and it can be disruptive to the state. If people are loyal to the family, they might go against the state, and Socrates doesn't want that to happen. Right, and so everyone's chief loyalty, and really the only institution that should matter to anyone, is the state. Now, this leads him into a discussion of things like selective breeding. Right, we should men and women should mingle together freely, but meaning they shouldn't have one sexual partner. Okay. But this should also be regulated, right? And he says, we don't allow dogs to breed with each other willy-nilly. We don't allow horses. If we need to be careful to make sure we get the best results. And so therefore, we got to make sure that the best men copulate with the best women, and make sure that those who are the worst are not able to essentially propagate at all, right? And so, there's a lot of regulations he puts into place here. He says, we should have holidays where men and women are allowed sexual release with each other, but this is all arranged by the rulers. When young men prove themselves good and true in war or anywhere else, honors must be given them, and they would have more generous freedom of intercourse with women, right? So there are ways that he, has envisioned dealing with this. And then when they actually get pregnant and have children, right, then the state takes over the children. Women would have responsibility to breastfeed their children, but they would not know which child is theirs. As he says, taking every precaution that no mother shall recognize her own. And Illegitimate children would not be supported by the state. As effectively he says, if a child comes from a union that is not certified by the rulers, and that child is effectively an outcast, or it's likely to be thrown out or cast out of the society, probably killed. Right. So there's a lot of eugenics going on here. Okay. And then all children are considered sons and daughters of all of the men and women, right? And so there is no special relationship, individual relationship that exists in the society. Now, there's a lot more to this, okay? He does get into some more stuff about, no private property, but he's kind of already covered that as well. He does say this would, do away with lawsuits and things like that. He gets a little bit into foreign policy by saying essentially that fellow Greeks ought to be favored above all other peoples, right? We shouldn't, if we go to war with other Greeks, then we shouldn't be cruel to them because, we are united in some way with them. There's the kind of unity of the sense of being Greek that we talked about in the context portion. Now, at the end of book 5, he says, look, there's one thing, okay, that would lead to a bad society or a bad city becoming a good one, right? And that is if the philosophers become kings, if the philosophers are given the rule of the society. And his interlocutors are like, wait a second, Socrates, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, wait, we need to define what a philosopher is. So I think I'm going to stop there and save this last part of book 5 for the next video, because he gets into a long discussion here about what philosophy really is and why philosophers are the best suited to rule. All right, thank you.